Okay, in this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to import text files into R. And right now I have the text files actually within my downloads folder on my computer. So I have three of them. I have this one right here, data set. You'll notice that we have values on several variables, but I don't have any headers, so there's no headers involved. This file right here where we have headers and basically values and everything are separated by spaces. And then in this one, we have everything separated by commas. So basically, I just have three versions of the same data that we're going to work from. So when you are importing data into R, the first thing to note is that you have to have R pointed at the directory that contains your data. Okay, so if you have R pointed at a directory that doesn't contain your data, then you're pretty much going to get an error message. You're not going to be able to read it in. So what I just said is my data is contained right now in my downloads folder. So I need to make sure first that R is pointed at that folder. So what I'm going to start off with is using the get.wd function in order to determine if R is pointed at my downloads folder. And so what I'm going to type in is get.wd and then my parentheses with nothing in between, hit enter, and so you can see that right now R is pointed at drive C, which is good. This entire path is good, but you'll notice it is pointed by default at my documents folder. So I need to change this because if I try to read in the data, it's not going to work. So you'll also notice that it's using forward slashes here instead of backward slashes, and all of this information is contained within quotation marks. So now what I want to do is to use the set.wd function and make my change. So now I'm going to type in set.wd, which is working directory, quotation marks, C, and then colon, forward slash, users, here's my name, separated by a space, forward slash again, and now I'm going to type in downloads in quotation marks and in parentheses. So now when I hit enter, you'll see that it worked and I don't have any error messages. So now when I type in get wd and then my parentheses, then I'm going to hit enter, and so now you can see that our working directory has been changed. So at this point we are ready to go when it comes to importing our data. So now what we're going to start off with is we're going to start off with the dataset .1 right here. So we're going to import this data set, and we're going to use the read table function. So there is a read text function, but the read table function works well, and it's actually kind of generalizes a little bit further than just using a read text function or read a CSV function and that sort of thing. So what we'll do is we're going to go back to R, and I'm going to create a new data object that's going to contain the data. So I'm going to call this data object new data 1 and have a arrow that's pointed to it, and we're going to read the data into it. And this data object is basically going to be a data frame. So I'm going to use the read.table function, and then inside the parentheses, I'm going to start by typing in the name of the file. So the name of the file, going back here, is dataset.1. Notice that it has to be in quotation marks. So I'm going to type in dataset.1 and also the file extension, which is txt. So make sure that that's in there. In quotation marks and then a comma. And then the next step is it says I'm going to type in the argument header equals true, because in that data set that we were just looking at, we have our header right here, and we have basically our variable names. So we want to pull that in. So at this point, I'm going to hit enter. And now when I want to look at the data, I can just type in new data 1, and there it is right there. So you can see we have Paul, party, interest, motivate, achieve, and gender. So that's how you do it. So the next step is let's try to import data from dataset 2. So I'm going to click on this just to show you what it looks like again. You can see that we have commas separating our header names, our variable names, as well as the values for those particular variables. So I want to import this data. So I'm going to type in, I'm going to create a new data frame called new data 2, and have my arrow pointed to it. I'm going to type in read.table, and then we'll type in dataset 2 period or .txt, and then I have to have my end quotes. So make sure that when you're putting in the file name that you have it in quotation marks. Then I'm going to have a comma, and then type in the argument header equals true. Now, in this case, we're separating the values with commas. So I'm going to type in a comma here to create a new argument and type in sep, S-E-P, equals, and then start a new open quote, then comma, and then end quote. Okay, so at this point, what we're doing is we're telling the program that the values are separated by commas. Make sure that we end with our end parenthesis. We'll hit enter, and so now when we type in our data, the name of our data frame, new data 2, and then hit enter, it prints out the same thing as before. So that was using essentially comma separated values. Okay, so the next step, we want to look at the situation where we might have something like this, where we have our data. You can see that we don't actually have any headers, and so what I'll do is I will import the data, and then we'll create some headers. So at this point, what we'll do is we're going to type in new data. So this is just going to be yet another data frame. So I'll type in new data, and then our arrow, and then read.table. And then in this case, it's the file name is dataset.txt, in quotes right here, then comma, and then header, and so now it equals false. So when we hit enter and type in new data, you'll see that we get our same data, but now you'll notice that we don't have any variable names with this. So if we want variable names, what we're going to have to do is we can use essentially a column names function to get this accomplished. So the first step, what I'll do is I'll type in call names, and then the name of the data frame, which is new data. So we're putting that in inside parentheses. The next step is we're going to start a bracket, and then type in call names, and then new data again. So there's our data frame name, and then in parentheses. We'll type in 2 equals right here, and then we're going to type in quotation marks, and then the name of the first variable, which is V1 right here. So it's giving some default names right here, which is V1 to V5. So we want to change that from V1 to another name. Specifically, we want to change it to political party or Paul party. So I'm going to say V1 is in quotation marks here, and then in bracket right here, and then we're going to have another arrow, and then we have the name of the new variable name, which is Paul party. Okay, and we have to put that in quotes. So notice the structure. We're basically taking the original data frame, new data, and we are converting the default variable name right here, or column name right here. We're converting that into a new name, which is called Paul Party. So now when I hit enter, and if I want to take a quick look at it, new data, you can see that now our column name is changed from V1 to Paul Party. So if I want to do this for the next one, well, let's just do for interest, which is going to be the V2 that we see up here. So that's the V2 right there. So we'll type in call names, and then new data. So that's the name of our data frame. And then our bracket, then call names, new data, and then 2 equal signs. So don't put 1 equal sign, put 2. And then we'll type in V2 in quotation marks. So that's the old column name, and then we'll type in our arrow, and then inside quotation marks interest, and in quotation marks. So make sure that you put both quotation marks, the beginning and ending, then hit enter. And so now when we type in new data, you can see that we now have interest as a new header, whereas before it was V2. So that's basically the process. Another option, if you want to name everything all at once. So this right here, you might choose to name, let's say the first column, the second column, and the fifth column. This process will work really well. You just are essentially creating a new name for whatever missing names there were before. Or another option too is to type in names, new data, and then our arrow, and then we have use our C function, and then we just type in the variable names in quotation marks separated by commas. So let's say that we want to do Paul Party in quotes, followed by interest, followed by motivate. Now notice all of these have to be in quotation marks, followed by achieve, followed by gender. So notice that in this particular case, I'm providing variable names in the order in which they are supposed to appear in the data set. So now when I hit enter and then type in new data, we now have all of our variable names as well as the data.